Servus Männer, it's Red Pill Germany again. What I want to discuss today is the phenomenon that in central Germany, that is the eastern part of our wonderful republic, a local cooperation between the AfD and other parties that more or less vowed to shun them is becoming more and more commonplace. Well, it is not really normalized yet, it's not common yet, there is still an outcry, but the attempts for such a collaboration on the local level become more and more frequent. And it is only a matter of time before it will be normal and not newsworthy anymore, really. It was actually the very same thing with the party Die Linke, which is only a renamed version of the old Socialist Unity Party in Eastern Germany. In the beginning, the other parties said we will never collaborate with them, but now the Green Party and also the Social Democrats, they are of course collaborating with them, also in Western Germany. So there is no outcry anymore. That was a thing of the 90s, and I think it will be the same thing with the AfD. Right now, everybody says, oh, we will never vote together with them, we will never collaborate with them, but I think in a couple of years you might already see the first coalitions, who knows? And this is the phenomenon that I call the Central German transformation. It is just because the AfD is so popular in many eastern states, so they are well represented in the local parliaments and also on the community level, and then there is just a lot of ideological overlap with the CDU, for example, but also, no surprise actually, with the party Die Linke. So in today's video, I want to describe this phenomenon a little better, and in doing so, I want to follow up actually on two videos I made previously. The one is of course in the more broader sense the video on the Central German transformation, and the other one is a more recent video about the faction of the CDU in the local state parliament in Sachsen-Anhalt. They still have to vote in favor of the increase of our public broadcasting household fee, and they refuse to do so together with the AfD party. That is a story I reported about recently, and I want to follow up on that, and I want to show you that this collaboration seems to be solid. The CDU faction, they refuse to be intimidated. They are holding their ground as far as I can tell up until now. But before we go into all that, I want to thank my supporters and my subscribers. Thank you all so very, very much. If you like my presentations, like, share and subscribe. And if you want to support my channel, you can do so directly via PayPal or via Patreon or Subscribestar. You find the links down below. Alright, so let's start with the more recent story, and that is, as I said, the refusal of the CDU faction in the Landtag in Magdeburg in Sachsen-Anhalt to vote in favor of an increase of our public broadcasting fee. So it is basically a contract between the state and the public broadcasters. All the other federal states have already voted in favor of that new contract that contains this increase of the fee, or they have signaled that they will do so very soon. Only Sachsen-Anhalt is making trouble now. Now officially the CDU faction says that Central Germans are underrepresented or they're shown in a negative light in the public broadcasting generally. Also, the public broadcasting services in central Germany are much smaller than the ones in the west of the country. And that is something that the Communist Party Die Linke actually agrees with, but they still want to vote in favor of that contract. Basically only because the AfD is also against that contract. And the AfD is against that contract everywhere in Germany, not just in central Germany, because the AfD, of course, says that they are shown in a negative light and that the public broadcasting is very left-winged oriented. The journalists there that work there, we know that according to surveys, they are very much left-winged aligned politically. And from the perspective of the AfD, the public broadcasting is basically citizen-funded propaganda for the left-winged establishment and against the AfD, against the patriots. And while the CDU is not outright saying that, but I think they also agree, because especially in central Germany. The CDU is also more conservative. There is this more conservative traditionalist subgroup, the Werteunion, the Value Union, and they are more popular in central Germany, I think, compared to the West. So the CDU is not outright calling the public broadcasting service a propaganda tool, but I'm sure that many of them think the same way. What is just interesting here in Sachsen-Anhalt is that the governor, who is also a CDU governor, is actually in favor of that contract, and he is fiercely against any form of collaboration with the AfD, and this would be seen as a collaboration, of course. Voting together on a certain topic, that is already collaboration in their mind. So it is not even allowed that on one topic in all of the year, your opinion is coincidentally and maybe for very different reasons aligned. That is already forbidden. And this forces you, of course, into a corset that is very tight and limits you somewhat, don't you think? Now, Mr. Hasselhoff, the governor, he pledged to Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, the chief of the CDU, to solve the problem, but he is sure that there will be resistance. His faction is determined to vote against this contract, this increase of the radio fee. And I think the motivation for the members of the CDU faction to vote against this law, or this contract I should say, is very straightforward. Sachsen-Anhalt has a state election next year. It is scheduled to be in the beginning of June 2021. And they are saying now, if I vote in favor of that, then my voters in my district will punish me next summer and they will vote for the AfD instead. So because these CDU parliamentarians in the Landtag in Magdeburg, they know their voters, this is why they are basically forced to vote against this contract if they want to keep their seat in parliament next year. So this is a very peculiar situation in which they have to rebel against their party leadership if they want to stay in parliament. And that is a classical conflict between a federal party leadership and a local parliamentarian or a local faction in a state parliament. It is also very funny that this coalition that they have there is called a Kenia-coalition. That is a black-green-red coalition. And that is between the CDU, the Social Democrats, and the Green Party. And that is, of course, a very fragile coalition. If you look at this picture, you probably know why they decided to enter such a weird, skewed marriage, or a triangle, I should say. It's more a hate triangle rather than a love triangle. Because the Green Party and the Social Democrats, I think they like each other, but they both hate the CDU and vice versa. Now, the only reason is, of course, so that the AfD, even though they have a sizable part of the seats in parliament, that they would not be in power. That is the only reason why they went into this very peculiar and strange coalition together. And it is obvious to everyone, of course, that the CDU and the AfD have way more in common and way more overlap and could do politics together way better than with these other two parties. But, well, what can I say? They are cucks in the end. Actually, the first cooperation between one of the German parties with the former Eastern German Unity Party was also taking place in Sachsen-Anhalt. At that time, it was in the 1990s, the party was still called PDS. And the governor Reinhard Höppner didn't have enough votes for his red-green coalition. So he had a minority government that was tolerated by the PDS. And then from 1998 till 2002, he ruled without the Green Party, but still tolerated by the PDS. So officially they were not part of his government, but he needed his votes, and he was of course dependent on them. So they formed a quasi-government in a tolerated minority model, and that is called the Magdeburger Modell. So maybe it is time for a new Magdeburger Modell between the CDU and the AfD this time. And we have another beautiful example that is even more local than a state parliament. This is really on the community level now, but it is so cool that this includes a collaboration between the AfD and the Commie Party. The story takes place in the city of Forst in Brandenburg. And this is about a very concrete question, a very specific issue in the community. They wanted to build a youth center, and the question was, do we renovate an old building or do we build a new one? And in this question, there is an alliance for Forst now, and that is a local group, then the party Die Linke and the AfD. And they want to build a new house for this youth center instead of renovating an old house. This is how I understood it, at least. And such a harmless local issue is already such a big deal for Germany, or for the establishment, let's say, that it is federal nationwide news now. And also the head of the party Die Linke and two of his followers, they are threatened now with being kicked out of the party. He says that completely ignoring the AfD on the very local community level doesn't work, especially when it comes down to these pragmatic questions that are not really of an ideological nature, like in what building we will have this youth club. The question is not even whether or not there should be a youth center or what kind of people will run it or something. No, the question is just what building will it be in. So that really seems like a harmless technical question to me. But that is already enough to kick people out of the party in Germany. Well, out of these parties at least. So what will these people do then? Because I think they're so far into this game already that they cannot get out anymore without losing face. I mean, they could just leave the party and make their own party, or be without a party, like a independent candidate or something, or they could just join the AfD. How about that? Coming from this far left party, they would not join the economics professor from Western Germany wing of the AfD, of course, but more the, how is it called again? Social nationalist wing? Something like that. Alright, so with these two examples, you see already what the mechanism behind the Central German transformation is. As a favorable parameter, you have ideological overlap between the CDU and the AfD, and then you also have pragmatic decisions on the community level that need to be made, and where people have this opinion or that opinion, and these questions aren't really political or ideological. You just want, out of your perspective at least, the best for your local community, and then you don't care if the person who also shares your opinion is from this party or the other party when it is about building a school or a youth center or something like that. You just want to get the job done for your community, and then you are forced to work together if you want to do what you think is best for your community. And I would agree with that guy from the party Die Linke, Peschke is his name, I think. On the very local level, these collaboration bans make no sense whatsoever. They're not practical, and they come actually at a high price for local communities, where one party that should be shunned by the others just has a large proportion of the seats in a local parliament, for example, or in a assembly. You would always have to go against them on principle, and that might rule out some options that are really good for the town. And then you have this other mechanism, of course, and that is fear. Fear of losing your seat in parliament, like with the CDU guys in Sachsen-Anhalt. They know exactly full and well that if they vote in favor of these higher public broadcasting fees, that their voters will be really angry, and their memory will last them until next June, I'm sure. If they, after all this commotion that has been made about this, if they still now turn around and vote in favor of this increased fee, then the former CDU voters in Sachsen-Anhalt, they would remember that in June, and they know where they have to make their cross on the ballot sheet then in June. Alright, I just wanted to follow up on these stories that I told you previously, these news stories and these developments, and I think these are beautiful examples of what I meant with this Central German transformation. There will be collaboration coming from the local level, and there will be a process, or we have already a process of normalization, even though some people in Western German publishing houses or in party headquarters have not realized that yet. It is already being normalized. And in addition to that, of course, with the protests against our lockdown measures and such things, there is of course another very, very strong avenue for collaboration between people of all sorts of political backgrounds. So especially in this context, this anti-lockdown sentiment in the population and all the protests that we see, when it comes to these events and protests and these opinions, I see a very high willingness of people from totally different political camps to put differences aside and to work together. And that is something, as I also said previously, especially in summer, this is something that scares the establishment. And it is just one more of these mechanisms, one more of these channels that leads to increased collaboration, and it makes it much more unlikely for the future that one party, such as the AfD for example, can be completely isolated from other parties or from people all over the political spectrum. Alright, let me know what you think about that in the comments down below, and especially from countries where there are corresponding patriotic right-wing parties like the AfD. In Europe we have a lot of those, as you all know. Please let me know, describe a little bit so that I get an idea. How is the political establishment in your country trying to isolate these parties? How are they threatening or intimidating people so that they don't collaborate with them? Maybe like here in central Germany on the local level first. What are they doing and is it working? Take care. Servus, Kameraden.